It's 9 o'clock. Welcome to our new show on Sky News, where I'm going to interview people who have something to say about the world and how it's changing. They'll be from politics, business, entertainment, public life, or they'll be everyday people caught up in the events of our times. But the main question tonight is, what now for the future of Ukraine? Will this war continue taking more and more victims, or could there be a way to stop it? And with reports now of streets lined with bodies and millions of people being forced to flee their homes, should NATO countries be doing more? Questions I'll be putting to tonight's special guests. Good evening. Just 2 weeks ago, families in Ukraine lived a normal life. They did the school run, they went to work, they had dinner around their kitchen tables. And now whole towns are left flattened with bombs and missiles raining down from the skies. At least 3 people died after a maternity hospital was hit yesterday in Mariupol. Normal life turned to hell on earth. For 2 weeks, people have been desperately fleeing their homes with the simple hope of not getting caught up in the fighting. The UN is estimating that nearly 2.5 million people have left Ukraine. That's the biggest mass movement of refugees ever. And now life in Russia gets darker too. Unprecedented sanctions imposed by governments from around the world, and private firms from oil and gas companies to McDonald's and Mothercare stage a mass exodus. Journalism is criminalised and the police roam the streets, intimidating and scaring the population. Still, today the two sides met in what is the most significant meeting since the start of the war. The Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers sitting down together in Turkey.
Those who are pumping Ukraine with weapons, they need to understand that they have responsibility for their actions.
A war that upturns decades of peace in Europe and will redefine this century. In all my time in the political arena, I've never before seen our leaders presented with such a consequential moment in history.
I've got a massive admiration for Vladimir Zelensky, and I think any leader in his position would be saying exactly the same thing. They'd be saying, why can't you provide that air cover?
The once unimaginable is now a lived reality for all of us. I'll be asking, what does the West do now? Well, tonight we'll have my exclusive interview with the Prime Minister, and we're going to be joined here in the studio by Marina Litvinenko, the widow of former Russian agent Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned by radioactive polonium in London. And finally, Labour MP and mother of the House, Harriet Harman, speaks to me in her first televised interview since announcing she's stepping down at the next election. But now let's turn to our first interview. I travelled to Birkenhead in Merseyside today to speak to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Here's my exclusive. Prime Minister, I'd like to start this conversation with the bombing in Mariupol yesterday of the Children's Hospital. Putin appears to have committed a war crime. What will it take for the West to get directly involved in this? Is killing children and pregnant women not enough?
I think what happened in Mariupol in that maternity hospital really shows that Putin is prepared just to reject, to abandon all norms of civilized behavior, and the sort of cynicism with which the Russian Sergei Lavrov admitted that they'd attacked that maternity hospital shows the depths to which they will stoop. And what we will do, of course, we already are involved, Beth, in the sense that we are, from the beginning, the UK was the first European donor of defensive military equipment. We've massively ramped that up, and what we're doing now is, as you can see, is tightening the vice, tightening the pressure on Vladimir Putin's regime through economic sanctions, and targeting not just SWIFT, not just his banks, but as many of his people who are known to be associated with him as we possibly can.
And I will come to that. But
I think that when you look at something like the Mariupol, I mean, I don't know, but I think many of our viewers must have been absolutely shocked.
Lavrov said concerns over civilian casualties were, to quote him, pathetic shrieks.
But I'm afraid that is just where they are, and that is what we're dealing with. And I'll make you one other prediction, by the way, which is that the stuff that you're hearing about chemical weapons, this is straight out of their playbook. They start saying that there are chemical weapons that have been stored by their opponents or by the Americans, and so when they themselves deploy chemical weapons, as I fear they may, they have a sort of a Maskirovka, a fake story ready to go. And you've seen it in Syria. You saw it even in the UK when.
This is what you expect next, then.
Look, I just note that is what they're already doing. It is a cynical, barbaric government, I'm afraid. And so, on your point about Beth, on your point about war crimes, I think it's the right question to ask. And as it happens, the Lord Chancellor, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dom Raab, has a lot of experience in this. He was one of those who was involved in putting Slobodan Milosevic before the Hague for trial, the Serb leader, for war crimes. And he will be going off to the Hague to see what they need, what evidence we can help to supply.
But in the meantime, Prime Minister, the bombing of a maternity hospital, at least 516 civilians have been killed, the use of cluster bombs, thermobaric weapons, the threat of chemical weapons, troops opening fire on fleeing families, shelling of civilian humanitarian corridors, airstrikes on residential blocks. Is it not on your conscience every time you speak to President Zelensky and he asks you for that no-fly zone? It must...
It is.
How can you not?
It's terrible. I've got to say, it's absolutely terrible. And I've got a massive admiration for Volodymyr Zelensky. And I think any leader in his position would be saying exactly the same thing. They'd be saying, why can't you provide that air cover? Why can't you, as the West, simply help to clear our skies of Russian planes and stop us being bombarded from the air, stop this evil going on in Europe? And we've had some very frank conversations, and ones in which have been deeply upsetting.
You won't
because
do it.
The difficulty is the difficulty is that there is a line beyond which, quite frankly, the UK and NATO would be deemed to be in conflict, direct conflict, with Russia.
So no circumstances. If as you say, they could drop chemical weapons, is that not the red light? Nothing. Well, is there nothing that could happen that might make you change your mind?
It's agonising. It's absolutely agonising. And I've had this conversation at least a couple of times now with Volodymyr. But I think the difficulty is that it would require me to order RAF jets, UK pilots, into the air with a mission to shoot down Russian fast jets. And that is something that all my life, literally all my life, all my childhood, I remember something that we did everything we possibly could to avert, because that would be conflict between two P5 nuclear powers,
just to be clear,
two members of the Security Council.
No circumstances that can happen. Is that what you're saying?
I think we've got to be realistic, and we're going to do everything we can to support the Ukrainian people, to support the amazing, heroic Ukrainian resistance, and we're doing more and more with support with air defences, with anti-tank weaponry, and all that kind of thing. I don't want to go into the details, but I think our viewers know roughly what we're doing. It has been ramped up, but that is effectively a defensive measure. But I just want to stress that there's no Western country where that is on the agenda.
When you speak to President Zelensky a lot, every time you put the phone down to him, do you wonder whether that might be the last conversation that you'll have with him?
So listen, I think Volodymyr has been one of the most extraordinary leaders of recent times in the way he's rallied. He's not only rallied his people, He's rallied the whole world to the cause of Ukraine. And he's made us all wear yellow and blue flags. And he's got everybody mobilized on his side. I think because he's so clearly and brilliantly delineated the difference between right and wrong in this case. Everybody can see that this is an unjustified act of aggression by Putin.
He did an interview on Sky News last night, and he said he thinks millions of people could die. Do you think millions of people could die in this conflict?
I think that it depends on Putin, and it's up to him and to him alone, and that everybody can see that things aren't progressing in the way that he hoped.
Prime Minister,
and his best bet, I think, is to withdraw, to cease the violence, and to allow a peaceful negotiation to begin.
Let's go on to Vladimir Putin. 2 weeks into this war, it's already unbearable to see the images coming out of the Ukraine. Your Foreign Secretary said it could last a decade. Do you agree with that?
I think that, again, that depends on Putin. But what I certainly think is that the Ukrainians themselves and the will to resist in Ukraine will never be extinguished.
I get that, but how long is it going to go on for?
You heard that from Volodymyr Zelensky
we're in for
himself.
the long haul.
I think that
Months,
my
years?
own view is that Vladimir Putin can either choose to accept that he's made a catastrophic mistake now, or accept that he's made a catastrophic mistake a bit later on.
But when?
And that's the difference between the two options he faces.
But how long?
That is, I'm afraid, up to the Kremlin. You know, Beth, I wish that I could tell you how long it will be. I think that he has said that he wants to give the military operations till the end of this month. You've heard what Putin's own narrative is. I myself don't believe, and I don't think most people looking at the situation believe. I don't think that he can conquer Ukraine. Ukraine is a country of 45 million people.
But Prime Minister, you keep saying that Putin must fail.
I do.
But do you acknowledge that Putin in his mind must be seen to win? That's the problem. You keep saying he's going to fail, but he has to win. So how do we get out of this?
I think that he needs to understand that his options are not good now.
But you accept that he needs to have some sort of victory. What's the off-ramp?
Well, when you say needs, that I don't know what you quite mean by needs.
What's the off-ramp for him?
What I think is that the best way out for Russia, for the Russian people, is for withdrawal of the Russian forces and for total cessation of hostilities, for reparations. And I think we will all have to work together to rebuild Ukraine, be in no doubt. But that's just the beginning.
But you accept the point that he won't be able to fail.
I think you've put your finger on something very important, which is that I think that Vladimir Putin has himself made it very difficult to find an off-ramp, and he has, I think, driven his tanks, so to speak, down a cul-de-sac from which it will be very hard to extricate himself, but he must.
But in the meantime, millions of people are going to die, so how do you help him get an off-ramp? I mean, what's the compromise? What's the compromise? Should Ukraine say, OK, we'll withdraw our application for NATO? Or, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is all I see is escalation, and I understand the sanctions, but it's escalating, there's no de-escalation, and in the meantime, millions of people could die. I
think what needs to happen, first of all, is that Putin needs to understand that he's made a catastrophic miscalculation, and he needs to withdraw, he needs to stop killing innocent people in Ukraine. I then think that there is certainly space for a conversation about the future, but it's got to be in that context, and it's got to be something that the people of Ukraine and the Ukrainian government actively want, Beth. And I think this is the crucial thing. I don't think that you can have a conversation about Ukraine without Ukraine. they've got to be at the table.
But it does seem to me that
they've got to be willing to
But you can't see a way out at the
those
moment.
conversations.
You can't see a way out at the moment.
I can't see a way out that doesn't begin with the realization by the Kremlin that they've made a catastrophic mistake and that it's time to begin to withdraw. It's time to withdraw immediately.
So let me just move on to sort of domestic response and your leadership over that. In terms of sanctions, today you finally sanctioned Roman Abramovich and 6 other oligarchs, something people have been calling for a couple of weeks now. It's been welcome, but do you acknowledge you could have moved more quickly on this, and do you wish you had?
I think the UK has been absolutely out in front in the whole sanctions process, and don't just listen to me, listen to what the Ukrainians have said, look at what the Kremlin themselves have said about the UK's role in this. We drove the sanctions
why didn't you go
on SWIFT
sooner, though, on Abramovich? Was it
on the
just
central bank, on
why
Aeroflot.
didn't you go sooner,
but on those individuals, don't forget that we've already done 200 or 300 individuals, and in the UK we have pretty tight protections of property rights. From Tuesday, we'll be able to go much further and faster because we're changing the law under the Economic Crime Bill. What we've been able to do with the individuals who've been sanctioned today is to look at their relationship with the Russian regime. The due process has been gone through, all the evidence has been assembled, which is the right thing to do, and they've been sanctioned in a very tough way. But that's the way we've had to do it.
When you campaigned to take back control, was it so that when we have issues like the Ukraine crisis, that you can be more restrictive than the European Union when it comes to visas?
No, because if you look at what we're doing, we're historically and by nature a very, very generous and open, welcoming people.
But we've only issued 1,000.
People want to. Well, that was the number yesterday, and it's rising the whole time, and it will rise very sharply.
Have you personally intervened to try and fix it?
Very sharply. So
have you had to personally intervene?
On Monday, you'll get from the Levelling Up Secretary, you'll get the programme that will allow people to come in. So people want to welcome it into their own homes. They can do so. Now you ask about.
Well, I know you've said
checks.
I know you've said about checks and the need for biometric testing, but half of the 2 million refugees estimated to be are children. You don't need to biometrically test a child. I mean, it seems a bit heartless. Someone actually said to me yesterday, a cabbie, he said it's really heartless. Why don't they just waive the visa checks?
I'll tell you why. So for younger people, we're not being we're not making those requirements. But what we are doing is ensuring that. And I think this is the best thing also for refugees, because they want a scheme that is safe, that is welcoming, and that works. And if you've been to war zones, and as I'm sure you have, as I have, you'll know all sorts of things are going on there, and you'll find that there are people coming out of them who perhaps, for one reason or another, don't have the papers that they need, and may even have false papers. They may have a good reason for that, but it is sensible, given the attitudes of the Putin regime towards the UK. It is sensible to have checks.
So by the end of the year, will we have 20,000 refugees?
They are light touch checks, but I think that most people can see the case.
Prime Minister, I've got so many more questions,
and
but I'm going to have to wrap up.
On the numbers, it could go up.
Yeah.
Just on the family reunion thing, you could have a very large number indeed, because there are so many potential beneficiaries of that scheme, and that's great. But I mean, as I said in the Commons yesterday, I'm proud, as is Dom Raab, as is the Deputy Prime Minister, as is the Home Secretary. We're all the direct descendants of refugees.
PM,
and our government has done a lot. If you look at the people we took from Afghanistan, the numbers we've taken from Hong Kong. So I know what our viewers will want to know, because what the British people want to know is, are we going to be generous? And my answer is overwhelmingly
yes.
We'll
test you on that when we, because at the moment we haven't done very well on it, and I think the public are a bit annoyed.
I also think people want us to have checks.
Yeah, but I think people are annoyed that we haven't done more.
I think people
you
will
must
find,
accept that's a fair
I think
point
people
for me to make.
people want us to be generous, but they also want us to be careful.
The final question I had for you, and this is about you levelling with the British people about the cost at home of this.
Yes.
Okay. Energy bills could go up to £3,000. Oil prices. I mean, do you even know what the cost of a litre of petrol now is?
It's high as everything.
It's 160 pence.
It is.
How bad is it going to be? Can you just level with people about the pain they're going to have to take?
So we will do everything. So we've frozen the fuel duty, for instance, for 12 years, and we will continue to do that. We will do everything we can to help households, help people with the cost of fuel, particularly elderly, vulnerable people, and you know all the packages of support we're putting in, even more that the Chancellor announced the other day. That's not going to be enough on its own. So the best thing for dealing with the cost of living, I mean, big picture, is to have a strong economy, good high-wage, high-skilled jobs, such as the ones that we're creating with our shipbuilding strategy, which you haven't mentioned, even though we're in this shipyard.
I'm sorry about that.
You could have done, but I'm going to mention it for you.
You're doing it for me.
I'm going to just slide it in there. We are launching our national shipbuilding. We're here in Camel Laird in Liverpool, and so but what we're also going to do, and this is absolutely vital. Not just have a high-wage, high-skill economy with record employment and almost record low youth unemployment, which is a great thing. What we're going to do is look at our energy supply. And what Putin is doing is proving how wrong we were in 2014 not to move away as Europeans, and the UK did more than other European countries, but we could do still more, to move away from dependence on Russian oil and gas. And so what I'm saying to you, Beth, is that now is the time, and it may be a bumpy period, but we will get through it as fast and as well as we possibly can. Now is the time to unleash an extraordinary program of energy independence.
A bumpy period.
Through massive investment in renewables, in more nuclear, a lot more nuclear, and also in sensible use of our own hydrocarbons, with our own oil and gas, without busting our carbon budget.
But we're all going to have to take the pain in trying to defeat Putin, aren't we?
And so, yes, I think that is right. I think that the West, and absolutely right, Beth, I think that the West is going to have to learn the lesson of indulging and appeasing Putin and failing to wean ourselves off Russian oil and gas. And we are now going to do the dramatic steps that we need to take to have independent energy supply so that we're no longer capable of being blackmailed by Putin. And that, I think, is the right thing to do.
Okay. Prime Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister there with a deeply concerning warning that Russia might use chemical weapons next in Ukraine doesn't bear thinking about. Stay with us, because coming up next, I'll be joined live by Marina Litvinenko, the widow of ex-Russian agent Alexander Litvinenko, who died in London from radioactive polonium poisoning. Welcome back. When former Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko died in London in 2006 from radioactive poisoning, it shocked the world that such an attack could happen on British soil. Since then, Russia has been found responsible for his death. Well, with me now is Alexander's widow, Marina Litvinenko, who is in exile living here in London. Marina, thanks so much for joining us tonight on my first show. I really appreciate it. Now, let's kick off with your recent holiday. You were in Ukraine, as I understand it, just in the run-up to the invasion. I think you left just after the invasion. You were with your friends. What was the atmosphere like, and how are your friends?
And first of all, very good evening. And shall I start with a very special words, glory to Ukraine, Slava Ukraini. This is very important to all Ukrainians to hear it, and to all people who support Ukraine now. When I went to Ukraine, I know it's a very tense situation in a board from side of Russia was very much unexplained and unexpected, and everybody discussed would be this war or not. But I decided to go 16th of February because I thought it's a good time to have a nice time in the very west of Ukraine, what is a very peaceful, very beautiful area. And I didn't think I would be in Ukraine and I received this news, war has started. And in the same moment, all this small town was mobilized. It was not panic, it was not hysteria. Everybody tried to receive news from their relatives in the east of part in Ukraine, from Kyiv, from Kharkiv. It was shocking news. And this small town expected these all refugees immediately and started to think how they could accommodate them, how they could bring them to the board if they decide to travel to Poland or to another country.
So they started to wonder, how could they help refugees? Did they start arming themselves? Did they...
This was all just, I would say people were ready for something worse, but of course they didn't want it, but they've been ready for this because this was a lot of organizing of self-defense organization when all men were ready to go to this. People went to special station to give their blood. Even I went to do this.
So you gave blood? So everyone went to build up the blood supplies for the army?
Yes, and this was so many people. It looks like this whole town was ready to give their all blood to these soldiers, to casualties, to anybody.
Did Putin miscalculate the Ukrainian people's spirit?
100%. I think 2014 gave them to Putin and to his alliance just this is wrong message. Ukrainian people soft, they're not going to fight, and like in Crimea, just will say welcome and would be happy to be part of Russia, but it was wrong.
And how are your friends now?
It's still quite serious, but this part is okay.
It's in the west, so they're
very
not
west,
in
and I think
the areas of conflict yet.
Yes, it's even not Lviv. This is more close to Slovakia border, to Poland, to Hungary. But people in Kyiv in a very serious situation. I have a very good friend of mine, a member of Ukrainian Rada, and she's a woman and a young, very promising politician. She's fighting with Kalashnikov.
Okay. And Marina, let's talk about your late husband, Alexander, Sasha, as you knew him or spoke of him. I think we've got a wedding photo, actually, of you. There you are. Can you see it there, Marina? It's on the screen.
Yes.
Isn't that a lovely... That's gorgeous, huh? I just want to ask you about a letter that Sasha wrote, an open letter to Putin 2 days before he died. You'll know this off your heart. He said, "You may succeed in silencing one man, but the howl of protest from around the world, Mr. Putin, will reverberate in your ears for the rest of your life." When did Sasha realise that Putin was bad for Russia?
From very beginning. And when he stand up in 1998 against of all this corruption and security service, it was his first fight against Vladimir Putin because he was put to prison and spent almost 1 year. And then when he escaped, he published a book, Blowing Up Russia, about apartment bombing, when he openly accused of security service to do this crime against Russian people because they want to show Putin as a strong man and he will defend all ordinary Russian people, what was not true. And his second book was just explained everything what happened in FSB, successor of KGB. And this was all what he tried to prevent.
And Marina, you obviously have friends in Russia still that you talk to. Do you think that Russian people understand what's going on? Or do you think that because of the media restrictions that they don't really know what's happening in Ukraine from your experience of talking to people?
It's not even restrictions, it's completely brainwashed. Yeah. And some people just afraid to think about truth. They maybe understood something very bad happening in Ukraine, but they're afraid to talk about this.
What, because they can't believe that this is really happening? They're afraid of the truth?
Because you need to accept you live in a country who's aggressor. And this is very difficult. And sometimes they started to defend Putin, defend all these actions.
Marina, do you think that the Russian people might eventually overthrow Putin, or is it so repressive there that it's not possible?
We don't know. Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 when nobody believed it, because it was the strongest country and opposition to all other world. And now, yes, it's a different one, but I don't think it's as strong as it was Soviet Union. Yes, they try to control everybody, every individual, but we still have people outside in the street with this all protest.
And Marina, can I just ask you as well, you've lived in Britain, your adopted country, since 2000, so over 2 decades now. Are you happy with the way that Britain has responded to the crisis?
Now, of course, it's much better than it did happen before. And we every time cry for this, you have to do something. Now it's a huge international support, and it's this united country in European Union, United Kingdom, America, and other countries. What is very important, for Putin, it was always very important to make these all countries to work separately.
To divide everyone.
Exactly.
And so now he will be confounded or confused by the fact that the West is united. He might not have anticipated
it's
that.
Another surprise for him.
Do you think that we're taking enough refugees?
I don't think so.
Right.
And we know this picture from Calais in Paris when people need to go back to apply for visa.
Yeah.
It's a shame, because I saw these people spend hours and hours to get through Ukrainian border and then go to see maybe their relatives here in UK. And I would like to say, these people don't want to get out from Ukraine. They pushed from Ukraine.
Yes.
And they're not looking for better life. They definitely come back when it would be all finished.
So you would like our Prime Minister to follow the European Union and introduce visa waivers for the people of Ukraine?
Absolutely, because you will save these people and they will all time grateful for this.
And just finally, do you think that politicians here made a mistake in welcoming Russian oligarchs so warmly to the UK in the past?
Of course, we need to learn all mistakes of what we did. And of course, politicians play this, I would say, ruthless, because it should be checked, and money and people who've been accepted here. And now we should talk about not a past, we should talk about present and about future, not to make more mistakes.
OK. Marina, I'd love to carry on, but I've run out of time. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, look, stay with us, because coming up next, the mother of the house, Harriet Harman, on why she's stepping down as an MP and the reflections on losing her husband, Jack Dromey. Welcome back. This week's been one to celebrate women. With International Women's Day on Tuesday, it's a time to recognise the achievements of women around the world. In politics, it's been, and often still is, a fight to get women's voices heard. And one of the women who's been leading that fight in British politics for 4 decades is Labour MP Harriet Harman. She's the mother of the House of Commons, which means she's the longest-serving female MP still sitting. And earlier, I spoke to her in her first television interview since announcing her retirement. Harriet, thanks for coming on the show. You became an MP in 1982, and it was against the backdrop of mass protest against nuclear weapons. The women at Greenham Common, it ended up with thousands of people protesting across the UK. And now, as you prepare to stand down as an MP 40+ years on, we've got this moment where President Putin has put his nuclear weapons back on alert. And I wondered what that made you think, as if we've gone back 40 years, back to the Cold War, back to a world that we thought maybe was in our past.
Well, I think that the path we've tried to go on since then is to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons, of having more and more countries becoming nuclear countries, and to reduce the nuclear arsenal of those superpowers that did have nuclear weapons. But it is one of the most frightening, in amongst the horrific things that's happened with Putin's invasion.
And Harriet, you've been a lifelong supporter of Labour values of internationalism. What do you think is the principal position to take on Ukraine? That they should fight tooth and nail to liberate their country, that there should be an immediate ceasefire and talks leading to a compromise? What should we be doing?
Well, I think what we should be doing is what we are doing, which is saying that they are absolutely right and entitled to defend themselves, and Putin is absolutely wrong to invade. We just have to be absolutely clear about that, and do everything we can to support them in their fight against Putin, which is a defence of themselves, a war that, as President Zelensky said to us in the House of Commons yesterday, a war that they did not start and they did not want.
What was it like in the Commons yesterday?
Well, it was a bit chilling, really, because it drew to your attention how safe and secure we are in the House of Commons, in London, in the UK, and we saw President Zelensky in such a position of jeopardy, with hundreds, if not thousands, of his people being killed and millions fleeing under attack from a nuclear power. I think it just showed the stark contrast.
And Harriet, you obviously support Sir Keir Starmer's position, but it has stoked division in the party. 11 MPs signed a letter accusing NATO of sabre-rattling, and then Keir Starmer threatened those MPs with suspension. Labour's always been a broad church. Do you think it was a bit aggressive to sort of threaten people with suspension?
Oh, not at all. I think that if you're the leader, you have to have a clear position, and you need to make sure the party has a clear position. And the Labour Party does have a clear position, which is we support NATO and we support Ukraine. And we couldn't have people who were Labour MPs somehow qualifying that. So I think he was right. I mean, one of the things about leadership is, yes, listen to and include a broad range of views, but in this sort of situation, you have to be decisive, and that's what he was.
The reason I wanted to get you on the show was it was International Women's Day this week. You have been the most prominent feminist campaigner in politics for many decades, actually. You're the longest-serving female MP. You're the true trailblazer. And I remember a few years back when I was talking to a Conservative MP about getting more Conservative women on the benches, they said, we need a Harman figure because you drove through such change. And I think we've got a picture somewhere of 1997 and Blair's Babes. Do you remember that? Can you see yourself there?
Oh,
Do you
yes,
remember that
the
day?
green, yes. Yeah.
With Tony Blair, and there's the late Mo Molan in front of you. You were behind All Women Shortlist. What was it like back then when you had this breakthrough?
I think it was incredible because it was a time when women were just saying we're fed up with being regarded as second-class citizens. You know, we're fed up with the idea that, you know, men should run the show and women should abide by everything that men say, and that we were fed up with being excluded from, you know, all walks of life, including political journalism. And so to have that breakthrough and to have women in the House of Commons representing a country which is 50% women was a very important moment. And, you know, as we went around, you know, if you went to the supermarket or you just went out and about in the street, people would come up and say, it's fantastic. Women would come up and say, it's fantastic to see you there in the House of Commons, because otherwise, previously, it had just been a sea of grey suits. There was 97% men and only 3% women, and Parliament was just downright unrepresentative.
Yeah.
And that affected the public policy agenda. You know, we've still got a way to go. We've still got a way to go until women are really on equal terms.
There's the obvious question. There's ever been a female leader of the Labour Party. The Conservative Party had 2 female prime ministers. You know, some people might say that Labour has a bit of a woman problem. Is that fair?
Well, we've certainly got a woman problem in terms of never having a woman leader, which is downright embarrassing. And next time, although we're not going to be having a leadership election anytime soon, next time we do need a woman leader. But that
Who would your money be on?
Oh, you know, honestly, I'm going to let the future MPs and, you know, party members choose that. But the other thing is it can't be taken away from Labour that we did lead the way, and we did by ensuring we had all those Labour women MPs. Then the other parties began to look quite old-fashioned as men-only preserves, so they followed in that path.
Let's move on to another area which I know you've campaigned on and care deeply about, which is violence against women and girls, because, again, this is a very poignant and relevant issue at the moment. We've recently had the anniversary of the abduction and murder of Sarah Everard, that moment that lit a touch paper in this country where thousands of women came out to protest against violence against women and girls, rape cases at a record high, prosecutions a record low. When I interviewed the Home Secretary, she said all of us at some stage in our lives have been subject to all sorts of harassment. Is she right? Have you?
I think there's not a woman in this country who hasn't, at some point, at some part of her life, been followed down the street, been harassed on public transport, been sexually harassed at work. I mean, it's just every woman's universal experience. And what's happening now...
Harriet?
Oh, I mean, I was sexually harassed at work when I was a trainee solicitor. You know, like every schoolgirl, if I walked down the street, I was always looking over my shoulder and, you know, men would follow along in cars. And that's still happening today. But what is different today is that women are rightly saying, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We want curb crawling to be an offence. We don't want there to be impunity for men who rape women and say, well, she said no, but she actually meant yes. So I think that what is really important now is that women are no longer prepared to put up with what all of us have put up with. And also that when I was being sexually harassed at work in my 20s, there was no question of any complaints procedure.
What did you do about it? Did you
absolutely did nothing, said nothing to anybody.
What did you do to the man, or what did you just try and avoid him, or? What?
Well, I shrieked because he kind of came up and grabbed me from behind, but it wouldn't have occurred to me to be able to complain because he was senior and was, you know, my sort of line manager, and my future career completely depended on not being chucked out, and all the partners would have sided with him and I would have been regarded as a troublemaker. It's the same old story that every woman...
What did you do then, just avoid him?
Just be... Well, it's sometimes very difficult to avoid somebody, especially you have to work in the same room as them, just the two of you on your own. But I think the thing is now that there's an expectation there should be complaint systems, that they should be independent, that women can complain anonymously so that they don't expose themselves to victimisation, and that they shouldn't have to be frightened on the street. And people talk about women not feeling at risk, but it's women are at risk. So what needs to be tackled is the sense amongst men that they can harass women and that's just banter, or they can get away with it.
And Harriet, finally, let's come on to you and your decision to step down. You announced in December you were going to step down after 42 years of being an MP. And then since you took that decision, obviously your world was turned upside down with the sudden loss of your husband and fellow MP, Jack Dromey. And I want to say again how sorry we all are about that, Harriet. A week ago, there was the by-election in Birmingham, Erdington, which was Jack's seat. Was that really difficult for you? How was that?
I think it would have been really difficult if we hadn't have won the seat and returned a Labour MP. I mean, Jack was born and brought up a Catholic, and he always said he was lapsed, but he never quite got beyond the notion of an afterlife. And I'm sure he certainly would be thinking he was up there looking down, and he would have been horrified if there'd been anything other than a Labour MP following in his footsteps. So it's good to welcome Paulette as the new Labour MP. And just on Jack, your enduring decades of a long partnership. You've got 3 children, you've got 5 grandchildren. You just told me you've got a 6th on the way, so you're going to be very busy. Jack described you quite rightly as the outstanding parliamentary feminist of her generation, and he said he was in awe of you. While you in the House of Commons, you talked about Jack being a superpower who made us all walk taller and feel stronger. Does the strength of what you had together kind of give you the strength
to face the future now? Because it must be very discombobulating.
But I think if you've lived with that sort of domestic propaganda, it can't help but, you know, reinforce your confidence. And all of us get imposter syndrome from time to time and think that we can't do things. So to have that relentless positivity and belief is incredible. But it wasn't just me that was the beneficiary of that positivity and belief. That there are, you know, women in the trade union that he worked in, other women in Parliament, that he would always be encouraging, because he believed that a role of men was to support and encourage women and not to stand in their way and hold them back. So I am left with surely that confidence that has been built up all of those years. But, you know, we were together for 47 years, which is an incredibly long time to share your political journey and your life's journey with somebody. And the thing about being a widow after a long marriage is that, I mean, my mum lived till she was 100, so I might have another 30 years left. So this is a new chapter in my life, which I've got to figure out how to crack on with the things that I'm going to be doing for the next 30 years. And, you know, people say, oh, now that you're on your own. But I'm not with Jack anymore, but I'm not on my own. I've got my children, I've got my friends, I've got my work colleagues. And I don't agree with the notion that somehow that's out there that when you're a widow, your life is effectively over, that the best years of your life are behind you and somehow you're a lesser person. I think that we've got to recognise that it's a different stage of life, and obviously it starts with great grief and loss, but people can be, you know, they are themselves in widowhood, same as they are themselves at the rest of their life.
And has it changed how you approach stepping down as a parliamentarian? Because presumably your next 30 years are going to be different now. Did you think about carrying on working?
No, I haven't changed my mind about standing down. I've been an MP for decades, and for each day of those decades, I felt a great sense of responsibility for my constituents, for my role in Parliament. But at the end of the day, you can't carry on indefinitely. And I want to go when I'm still fully committed and doing the job to the best of my ability. And, you know, I'll see what's on the other side of stepping down from having those magic letters MP after my name.
Well, I'm sure that you will be doing many more interesting things, and I think your grandchildren are going to be keeping you very busy anyway. Harriet, thanks so much for coming on the show. Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you to all our guests, Harriet Harman, Marina Litvinenko, and of course, Boris Johnson. And thank all of you for joining us tonight. Later tonight, you'll be able to get the Beth Rigby Interviews podcast with all the highlights of this show and a few behind-the-scenes bits too. And you can find that on the Sky News app, or you can subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts from. Coming up on Sky News at 10, Mark Austin is live in Lviv with more on the war in Ukraine.